Good morning. It is very nice to see you again. Great to be here. It feels like a reunion. This is our third Pride and Prejudice conference. I recognize many familiar faces, and for those of you who's the first time, welcome. I'm delighted that you're all here. I'm delighted we're having this conversation. I feel that 3 years into doing this, we've made quite a lot of progress, and the LGBT agenda has made quite a lot of progress, even in the last year. If you look, Costa Rica's election was a pretty extraordinary election. Voters gave a resounding support for equality. That was essentially what the election was based on. Taiwan may become the first country in Asia to legalize same-sex marriage. There are more. We will hear from our colleagues in Hong Kong about one of the individuals very closely involved in that later this morning. But at the same time, it's also been a difficult year, I think, in some ways. And if you look at the kind of nature of the conversation, particularly the nature of the conversation led by the US president, it hasn't been one that's conducive to an equality agenda. If you look at what's happening in Brazil, a fiery anti-gay presidential candidate is lined up with a lot of support from the evangelical base. So in Chechnya, a violent crackdown. So there's also an awful lot of news that is not so great. So in the political realm, I think it's, you know, glass half full, but still an awful lot to do. And I think that is the environment in which you as businesses are operating. And what we've talked about in the last 3 years has been businesses as catalysts for change, businesses as catalysts for diversity and improvement. And that's really what we want to focus on here. And we want to drill down even more than we did in previous years. How do you catalyze progress? Not just why you should do it and what the case for doing it is, but how do you do it? And how do you move in the parlance from an embassy model to an advocacy model? How do you actually catalyze change? So we're going to be spending quite a lot of time this morning listening to advocates more broadly, actually, about learning what the techniques are for that kind of advocacy. And secondly, we've made this year more practical, more skills-based, more thinking about and learning from each other about the kind of techniques that companies can use. So we're going to split into separate sessions later on this morning to have some very practical, skill-based workshops. And another innovation we've made this year, which we're testing out and we hope that you'll find useful and rewarding, is a mentorship initiative. The idea is we're going to pair up individuals who would like to be involved, who would not usually come across each other, so that you can learn from each other about how to learn what others have done to push the LGBT agenda in your businesses, and also to make the case for advocacy more broadly. And just to set this in a broader context this year is our 175th anniversary at The Economist. 1843, a long, long time ago we started. And we have launched, to celebrate this anniversary, a much broader initiative called the Open Future Initiative, which is to make the case for free markets and open societies in the 21st century. And this agenda, the open society agenda, is an enormous part of that. So we will hear more about open future as the day goes on, but this Pride and Prejudice is one of our flagship events. We're incredibly proud to be involved with this, to be pushing this, and it's now part of a broader agenda that we have this year. Let me, before we start, mention a few more housekeeping points. First of all, where are my colleagues who are going to be introducing you this morning? There's Helen Joyce, our finance editor, Sasha Nauta, our finance correspondent, Alex Selby-Boothroyd, and Adam Smith, who's our audience engagement editor. These are all colleagues of mine who will be moderating during the morning. And of course, as always, these events cannot happen without our sponsors. So a big thank you to our global supporters, Alex Partners, Morgan Stanley, T. Rowe Price, and William Blair, and to our regional supporter, IBM. Please be active on social media, #EconPride. Please tweet throughout the day, at Economist Events, that's where you can follow it. Download the app if you haven't already done so, that's the way you can vote in all of the polls. And of course, fill in the evaluation forms. They are really, really useful for making us aware of what we could do better, so that next time is even better than this one. So with no further ado with that, let's get started. Can I invite the first panel, Alison Brittain, Chief Executive of Whitbread, Vittorio Colao, CEO of Vodafone, Carolyn Fairbairn, Director General of the CBI, and Sue Wally, Chief Operations Officer of the Royal Mail. Have a seat. I'm sitting here. Come and sit next to me, Alison. Welcome, all of you. So first of all, let's talk a little bit about the the case for promoting diversity, the case for being a leader, for having your business as being a leader in this space. And I'm going to start with you, Alison. You know, why are you doing this? Why are you here, basically?
I mean, I think the business case has been discussed, you know, long and hard, and the business case for diversity and diversity of thinking in organisations is pretty clear. I genuinely think we've almost passed that point of having to prove that diversity in businesses gives us better outcomes. There's some very unique challenges I face, which means that it's even more important for my business possibly than others. We have a very large employee base in the UK. We hire about 20,000 people a year. And if we cannot tap into all sectors of society to make our hiring choices, we would be very scarce in terms of our talent pool and our employee base. And so it's really important to us that we make our organisation as inclusive as possible so as to attract the widest range of people to the organisation and the best of the talent that's available to us. And we set ourselves a goal, therefore, of being the most inclusive hospitality company in the UK as our sort of overreaching goal for diversity. And that covers all forms of diversity. With LGBT specifically, you know, we have a customer base which we have to reflect, but more importantly, a sort of creativity and a set of people, a hospitality already being quite an inclusive environment, where we want to make people very welcome and want to make them feel secure in the way that they're employed. So we have a very specific LGBT programme as part of a broader diversity agenda. And so if that's the sort of business case and the real sort of optics on how you would sell that to a disbeliever, say, that's one thing. But then there is actually something just a bit more visceral and fundamental, I think, about how we want to be as a society and how we want to be as human beings and what environment we'd like our children to be brought up in. And that is one of much more diverse thinking and much more inclusivity. And that's not about a business case, that's about a world that we want to be in. And I think that's just as important as a driver as the hard-nosed or the edgy business case.
In terms of what's driving you.
In terms of what drives me and my team.
Can I just, I'm not sure whether the technology is going to thank me for this, but I want to just ask the room, perhaps with a show of hands, do you agree with Alison that we've kind of, the business case is now so clear and so obvious that we've gone beyond that? Can we sort of take that as given? Who thinks that's true? Yeah, I would say that's not so many. That's interesting because that's Vittorio. What do you think? You know, you and I have spoken before about why you have led such a push at Vodafone and why you're leaders in this space. And I sometimes say to you, "What's the business case?" And you slap me down and say, "It's got nothing to do with business."
Yeah, I mean, you and I discussed many times. I really am tired of this business case thing. You know, seriously, you know, it looks like we should do things if there's a business case, and we shouldn't do things if there's no business case. On diversity inclusion, particularly LGBT, but you know, women, races, everything, I really think the point is a much broader one. We have to do it because it is right, full stop. I mean, what if the business case was not good? Would that be a good excuse for discrimination? Would that be a good excuse for doing something in a different way? I don't think it would be. I really believe, just for the reasons that you said in your introduction, Zanni, unfortunately in the world we see negative forces. I'm sorry, I call them negative. We have to call them negative. We have to stand up. We have to resist. Now, of course, we are not political entities, companies, but you know, we are aggregation of people. So therefore, intrinsically, we are political. We need to stand up for the right things. Now, of course, we need to do it in the smart way. We need to do it in different ways in different markets. But I am a little bit beyond the business case. I don't care about the business case. I care about human rights. The statistics that, you know, really hit me is when we saw in Vodafone almost 20% of people saying, I don't feel comfortable being my own self. Now, you can turn it the other way around. 80% of people are very happy. Yes, okay, but 20 means that in every meeting, you have more than 1 in 10, you have 1 in 15 or whatever, 1 in 5 or whatever, who's not happy. And therefore, we have to act, and we have to do it because it's right, beyond the business case.
So, do you agree with that? That's a very robust statement of what a business should do beyond the business case. And I'm asking you particularly because the Royal Mail is a sort of pretty traditional, you know, blue-collar company. Would you agree with Vittorio?
Well, so for us at Royal Mail, you know, we're a huge organisation, 140,000 people. 1 in 194 people in the UK work in Royal Mail. We're in every single community. And I think for us, it's two things. So I agree with Vittorio in part. So for us, it's a strategic issue. You know, we're a business like many other businesses that is going through huge transformation. And transformation is about culture as much as it is about processes. And therefore, diversity and LGBT as a key part of that is part of culture change. And where I agree with Vittorio is that, you know, people need to feel that when they come to work, that they are respected, that, you know, whoever they are, whatever they are, that they can feel included in the workplace, that they feel comfortable in the workplace. And it is that is, you know, it's been a real challenge for Royal Mail, actually, because, as you say, we're very traditional. Many people have worked at Royal Mail for 20, 30, 40 years. And so we're going through a massive journey around awareness, around building an understanding. And, you know, we've made some huge progress. A few years ago, we would never, for example, have joined the Pride marches. We would never have done things like this. And, you know, for us, it is really all about culture change and feeling included in the workplace and feeling that you can be treated with dignity and respect when you come to work. And we want every single workplace in Royal Mail, and we have about 1,400 of them, so a huge number. We want all of those workplaces to be workplaces where people feel that they can be treated with respect when they come to work. So yes, really important. It's the right thing to do, absolutely.
So I'm going to come back in a second to ask you kind of how you've done it and what you've focused on. But Carolyn, first for you, you have, you know, hundreds, thousands of members. When you speak to them about diversity, when you speak to them about the LGBT element of diversity, what's the sense that you get? Do your members echo what we've heard on the stage thus far, or are there some that are, you know, still somewhat reluctant to move too far down this agenda? What's your sense of it?
I honestly think we are in the middle of a quiet revolution on this. I really do. And I mean, I partly agree with Vittorio that it's not business case, because that's such dry language. Actually, you know, the businesses that we're speaking to all the time, this is a very, very human question. And companies, I think, more and more, we are absolutely part of society. We feel the sense of pride, we feel the sense of importance about people, and I think the language has changed. But it is still about being a really successful company, and that the most successful companies out there are ones who enable people to be themselves, who engage people in what they're trying to do and purpose, and who are highly inclusive. And I think one of the really interesting things that we're seeing in my world is how many companies are being born inclusive. You know, the new companies of the new generation, they're not even questioning this. And so I think it's an exciting time. The real question, though, is in all those lists, in that priority list that a CEO has or an executive team has, where does this come? Where does it come in relation to Brexit or, you know, global trade? And I think we need to keep on making the case for why it needs to be absolutely at the top of the list. And that's when it becomes practical. We need the practical things that work, because I agree with everything that has been said, but I think it's also true that if you're a small company, it can get crowded out. And that's when things can go backwards.
I think you might have a perspective on this, Carolyn. I mean, we're preaching to the converted here. You know, you've got the people on the stage have come to this event because they're passionate and committed to a broad range of equality and diversity issues. And I've probably spoken on the subject on a number of occasions. And so when we say, well, the business case is made, we know that it's made for us internally and it's made for our organisations probably. But it isn't made, is it, across the piece? And there are sectors and industries and places where it isn't the case. You may see a broader cross-section of that, Carolyn, where probably the business case being made for success is a key step that we have to go through. So we're a bit blithe in saying, you know...
I was going to ask that, actually, Carolyn. Are there still particular parts of the economy, particular size of company where the business case still needs to be made?
Well, it's very interesting. You know, we watch I think Stonewall are here. Stonewall are fantastic, and they have the 100 employers, best employers of the year. We watch that list quite carefully, and we see who's on it. And we would love to see more manufacturers on it. Frankly, we'd love to see more retailers on it. We've got quite a lot of professional services firms on it. So there is a real way to go. But I will just say something just to mark progress. 15 years ago, companies on the top 100 employers list for Stonewall wanted to be kept anonymous. That just shows how now people are fighting to be at the top of the list. So I think that there is a way to go. Yes, some sectors have to catch up, but there is now real pride at being on that list, and that's real progress.
So let's turn to the practicalities. So, what have you learned is most important in really driving change within your organization? And two, how do you measure it? And what's the right way of thinking about whether you're actually making progress? And Sue, I wanted to start with you because you've got a traditional organization, as you said. What have you actually done?
So the tone from the top, I think, is really, really important. And, diversity in all of its forms, whether it's LGBT, gender, disability, parents and carers, young people, older workers, diversity, our board talks about diversity, our executive team talks about diversity. We've set, targets, and we measure
targets for what?
progress.
Targets for diversity of employees?
So we've looked at targets for recruitment, engagement. Engagement is really important, and we measure engagement. And we measure, for the first time this year, we've asked people if they're happy to identify themselves so we can start to understand where different groups of people are. So tone from the top, I would say, absolutely key thing. The second thing I think that we've learned is about setting a framework. And the way that we've done this is through a diversity council and networks. And, you have to start somewhere. So, we started with these networks primarily in our central functions. But what's been really, really interesting is the speed at which people across the organisation have sort of cottoned onto these networks and started to build these networks across different parts of our, very, very large company. And that's when we start to see real progress. When I'll go to a mail processing facility and I will meet the local LGBT group or the local gender group, for example. And that's where we start to see that there is a greater understanding and a greater community around supporting all of our colleagues. And then, what's also been really interesting for us is about using some of our assets. So, we have post boxes. We have 115,000 post boxes across the country. But actually, we created a rainbow post box. And the post box, the rainbow post box, has really become a symbol of the journey and the culture change that we are going on. And everyone wants to have the post box. So the post box has been to every single part of the country. It's actually been to the Houses of Parliament. It's also been to Buckingham Palace. But it's sort of a symbol. It's been a bit of a rallying cry for the organisation. And people follow the progress of the post box, the rainbow post box, and the networks that go with that. And then for me personally, as a leader, how do I know we're making a difference? Well, it can be when I go to a delivery office in any part of the country and I know we're starting to make a difference. When I will talk to somebody, it might be a younger gay female, or it might be, an older person who's just come out, or it might be a colleague who's just, gone through a transition. And I can talk to them and they can say to me, I'm really comfortable, and I'm really comfortable about talking about my story. And recently, and this has really been over the last 12 to 18 months, we have now got, people who are very, very happy to talk about their journeys within Royal Mail. and they're happy to go on video, and they're happy to talk about it. And that's when I start to know that we are making, a difference, and quite a profound difference, in what is a very traditional, very, very traditional organisation. And it takes time. And, we're not yet where I want us to be, but I think we've made some really, really good progress. As I said, a few years ago, we would never have joined the Pride events. And, this year we're joining 6 or 7. And, what's interesting about that is the number of colleagues who would identify themselves as straight, but who are, they're just caught up in this journey that we're going on, and wanting to support this journey of change.
I'm going to come back to you a bit later and ask you where you want to be in a few years' time. But let's just get to Alison. How do you hear echoes of what you've been doing there, or tell us what you've been doing and how you're measuring success?
Yeah, so it's I think different organisations are always in different start points and different places. So for our organisation, which is leisure and hospitality, the base point is very different, because it's not the same probably white male traditional workforce, and we're already a very diverse workforce and a very inclusive from a cultural perspective. But we've never measured anything. We've historically had no measurement systems at all. So, and that was quite a surprise. And probably coming from an industry in the end of 2015, joining hospitality, I came from an industry that wasn't very good at diversity. I had started to measure it, because if you don't measure things in organisations, generally they don't get done, and they are measurement systems are indicative in and of themselves of something that you give some importance to. We measure profit, we measure customer satisfaction, we measure team retention. Why would we not measure other things? So that was a bit of a surprise. And although there were no inherent problems, so no one had been provoked to do measurement, that it came as a surprise to me that we hadn't. And so we have started a whole set of measures that we look at, both input measures like the fact that we have started to support Pride events. We've done 12 over the last 2 years. We've outputs things like we have the Rainbow Latte, which is launched at Pride events and is great. They're super symbols. We've launched 2 networks, one for women, one for the LGBT community, Glow, that one. And within 3 months of launch, that had 1,000 members. Again, that's a measurement of both the advocate list and the membership lists of that group about how people feel. And our next stage of this is to ask people during our engagement, which we did a year ago, to declare where they are in terms of LGBT status, and then for us to be able to look at how people's engagement, where we might have tension points, even though we overall think we're in a good space. Actually, there are certain points, on a full engagement score where LGBT folks will tell us then that they have a different score to non-LGBT, and we can take very specific action then against that sort of feedback. And that's all pretty new. It's actually easier with the ethnicity and gender to do the measuring. It is much more difficult on LGBT to think about how you go through those measurement systems. And what I always come back to is I think LGBT people, my friends outside of work, my colleagues in work, they want broadly the same things as everybody else. They want great career opportunities, they want good pay and benefits, they want security of employment, they want creative jobs that add value, they want to work for a company with purpose and heart, and they want to feel proud and part of that. But what we do to ensure that we look, feel and always act in that inclusive way that gives them the right to have the career that they want, the pay and benefits that they want, that's enormously important. So again, we have 3 members of the team who we are very proud of, who regularly feature in the outstanding list each year. And again, we celebrate every time we have people on that list, we celebrate the people on those lists. So, but for us, it's measurement in and of itself is a relatively new thing.
Vittorio, you started measuring a while ago. What are you measuring, and how are you measuring progress in Vodafone?
At the end of the day, for me, the key measure is the one I mentioned before. The day when we reach 99% of people saying, I feel, and I say 99 because there's always 1% quirky people in every organization. But when you get 99% of people saying, I feel comfortable to be myself throughout the footprint, everywhere in the world, that's the day where I'm happy. And also the second measure, which is very delicate, but it's where, for example, we don't have yet enough strength, is when you see the percentage of senior people who actually openly, now that's a personal choice, so you need to give time, but for example, in Vodafone we are low there, and I suspect that there must be something not completely right. So that to me is the other measurement that I want to see better. In terms of what to do, again, here I really think tone from the top, of course, is important, but what is really important is sometimes also to push a little bit if you are the boss. So yeah, you have all the programs, the networks, but sometimes if you are the leader, you need to mark your point. I give you an example. We, as most people know, we do a lot of deals. We just did a big joint venture in India. And one of the kind of most important meetings with the new partners, where we had all people in the room and so on, we had all the non-negotiables and the things that each wanted to put into the joint venture. And of course, you have the brand, it's my brand, it's your brand, it's my CEO, your CEO, I mean, all the nice. And in one of the points, I put, all Vodafone policies, and I wanted to put LGBT. And of course, I got immediately advised, careful in India, it's not legal, blah, 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 blah. And I said, I will put the point, I'll make the point. And I made the point. Now, I didn't make the point to shock the other part, which probably I did. I really made the point for my people in the room. So they didn't understand it. I was not signaling to the other part that this is going to be a strong point. I was telling them, my people, this you guys have to consider as important as the brand, who is the CEO, running finance properly, whatever. And I think sometimes you need to push a little bit. I mean, I'm not an activist by nature, but sometimes you need to do these things. And then, of course, all the things that were said before, talking, going, not provoking the individuals, but provoking the discussion, which I think is very important, even in the places where it's borderline, even where it's borderline. Now, it's easy when you are Vodafone, it's much more difficult when you are a smaller company, of course. But we, again, I'm back to my earlier point, as large companies, we have some ethical, moral, almost political duties that for 20 years we have not completely looked, because we were focused on stock price, shareholder value, these things. We need to recover those, because otherwise the world will not necessarily go in the right direction.
So I now want to open, because I'm going to ask you all where you think this is going in a few years' time, what your goals are. But before I do that, I wanted to open for anyone want to either ask a question or offer their perspective on how you measure progress, where you think the most important place to focus on to see that there is progress being made. Yes, question here or point. Could you just identify yourself, because this is being live streamed so that people online can see you.
Yeah, hi, Cindy Godwin from Alex Partners. I have a question for Carolyn around the Diversity Council. How is that, how did you create that? And, how did you think about involving, all of the different constituents?
Sorry,
Oh, sorry, it was for Sue then.
Sue.
Sorry.
Yes. You may have one too, Carolyn. You can talk.
I was going to say I could answer.
Great.
So the diversity, that was a decision we took in the executive team, that we wanted a diversity council. We actually started with gender about 4 years ago. So when I took over as a chief operations officer at Royal Mail, I was, the first senior female that had been close to the operation, and I looked around and I thought, oh my goodness, we have a huge, huge challenge here. So we started with gender and set up a network for gender and set some very specific targets around recruitment, development, retention, many, many things. And then actually, as we got into that, what we realized was that gender was just one part of the diversity and inclusion journey that we needed to be on. And so we just made a very explicit decision at the executive team that we would set up a diversity council sponsored and led by the executive team. So each of the networks and we now have gender, LGBT, BAME, disability, parents and carers, young people and older people within our workforce. Each one of those is sponsored by a senior leader, and we looked for somebody in the organisation who was passionate and who would start to set up a network, and it has spread. It has spread. We talk about it. We talk about stories. We go out into our business and we talk about why this is important. We raise awareness through the stories, and we encourage people at the local level, in our delivery offices, in our mail processing centres, to take up the charge, because we can't do all of this at the central level. And that's where it becomes really, really powerful, is when people at the local level, I was in our National Distribution Centre recently, and this has been a very male-dominated area. And I met a group of women who'd taken up the charge and said, we want to make a difference here. So that's how we did it.
Right. Anybody else? Yes, right here.
Thank you. Thank you, Zanny. It's David Pearson, Director, Global Inclusion and Diversity at KPMG. We've struggled with this measurement question. Being a global organisation, it's very hard to measure LGBT in some jurisdictions. So one solution we've tried is to convert the activities we do around LGBT into registered training events. And that means that our people, when they come to one of these sessions, will actually be loaded up on the learning management system and get recognition for having done that. And it allows us, I won't say sneakily because that's inappropriate, but it allows us to measure the engagement and impact we're having on LGBT. So I was wondering whether any other organisations on the panel have done this or are thinking about perhaps using learning as the routine to measure impact.
Any of you?
We don't use learning, but we're not an international organisation. We're in the same way as you are, and therefore we haven't got quite the same challenges of places where we have legal issues, particularly. But we do use learning more generally to drive diversity inclusion as an agenda item, and that includes team training. I mean, this is at hotel level and coffee shop level for Premier Inn and Costa, to ensure that our teams behave with customers in an inclusive way, and that includes how to manage not calling people Mr. and Mrs. when they're not Mr. and Mrs. and how to deal with transgender activity, etc. So we use training in a broader context, but not necessarily from a measurement perspective. But and also building on Sue's point earlier. We have felt the need that change takes place in an organisation, but if it's not led from the top, it doesn't happen, for sure. And so things like when we launched our gay and lesbian out at Whitbread networks and programmes, both the chairman of the board and myself led all of the workshops, all of the stage presentations about it for the organisation. And it's actually quite unusual, I think, to have a board member, a chair, present as well as the chief executive, and it was quite symbolic and drove quite a big signal into the organisation.
Zanny, can I just sort of something which I think is very, very connected to that, is this idea which we're seeing a lot in firms, which is this idea of stories being told, really with a lot of people present, to kind of understand actually how difficult it is to be gay and to feel you can't come out, and the journeys that people have made in that, because we only have 25% of people who feel comfortable coming out at work. And the power that then has on awareness, and then the chain that we've seen is you then build the allies. People hear those stories, and it's Vittorio's point. This is about fairness. This is about human rights. And then you gather the momentum around allies, people who will advocate when you're not in the room. And there is something very powerful about the people you can get in a place listening to those stories and how that galvanizes change. And if you can measure that, then I think you are beginning to measure the contact points, the viral impact in an organization. And I think it is powerful.
Thanks, Carolyn. So there's a question that's come in from the app. Gosh, this is a tricky one. In Germany, we have a female quota of 30% for positions on boards of directors. What do you think of an LGBT quota in companies? Vittorio?
No, I don't think it's practical.
Carolyn?
I don't think it's practical. I don't think quota at this stage means anything. I think the very important thing is much more, first of all, to did what Carolyn just said, to talk about things and to make everybody comfortable. And then there's a second level, much more important, which is going clearly against stereotypes, which are at the basis of bias and influence a lot promotions, appointments, all these things. And this applies a lot to women, quite frankly, but also to race and other types of diversities. Again, in a constructive way, not in a deterministic way. Quota sounds very deterministic. What I find, but even on myself, to be honest, very often with all good intentions of the word, we define standard, quality, whatever, meritocracy, things that actually are very predefined historically by our own experiences. That is, I think, what will work. Quotas, to be honest,
do either of the three of you disagree?
I'm not sure how I would implement it.
I would agree with Vittorio.
Does anybody in the room think quotas would be helpful?
I'm slightly torn, if you
You're
want
torn.
to answer.
Okay.
I'm torn, but,
There's one person there who thinks quotas would be helpful. I'm not going to be able to ask you a question, unfortunately, because I'm literally, in 3 minutes, we are handing over to Hong Kong. So I am going to ask each of you, and this is going to be a test of how brief you can be, 30 seconds. Where do you want to be in 5 years' time? One thing that you want to have achieved in 5 years on the LGBT agenda that you haven't got there yet. Carolyn, 30 seconds.
I want to go from 25% people who feel that they can come out and be who they are at work to 90%.
Sue.
I want to be able to go to every part of Royal Mail and have people feel very, very comfortable telling their stories, and that we don't need networks anymore, because it's part of the culture and the way of working.
Great. Vittorio.
Considering that in 126 days I'm not the CEO of Vodafone anymore,
Where would you like Vodafone to be?
I want still Vodafone in 5 years' time to have whatever, 8, 10, 12, 15% of the leadership openly declaring and feeling that they can declare whether they are LGBT or whatever without any self-restraint or with freedom.
Excellent. And Alison?
And for Whitbread, I'd like full representation at all levels of the organisation throughout the entire hierarchy, across actually a very broad diverse agenda, especially with LGBT. And I'd like no difference in our measurement of people's engagement and wish to work and remain with the organisation, depending on any of the diversity criteria that we have.
And that's in 5 years' time, so you've even got 1 minute and 42 seconds to tell me whether you think you're going to achieve that.
I'm enormously confident that we're going to achieve that.
All of you confident that you can get to there in 5 years' time?
Yes.
Yes.
We will.
You will? And the audience agrees? Would that be a good goal? The audience looks a little bit more sceptical. Thank you all. That is a wonderful way to set us. In 5 years, we're going to, well, you won't be there anymore, but we will come and check.
I can still be invited.
Check and see how you're doing. I mean, I am struck by how different this conversation is than the one that we had 3 years ago when we've had our first Pride and Prejudice event. So it's, to me, a testament to how far we've come, that we're now, basically, you start off by saying the business case, that's so passé, Zanny, forget that. This is the right thing to do, and we've made a huge amount of progress. And just hearing what you've done, I assume in the Royal Mail it's been in the past couple of years, right? It's been relatively recent.
Couple of years.
It's
Absolutely.
really dramatic. That is a very uplifting and positive note to start this day on. So thank you all very much indeed. And now I'm going to have to shoo you off the stage so that we can get the line into Hong Kong. But thank all four of you very much indeed.